take your seats. We're going to have a great session in a few minutes. So, my name is Nick Robbins. I'm a professor in practice for sustainable finance at the London School of Economics. It's a great pleasure to be with you here today. I am the executive director of the Just Transition Finance Lab, and we are really focused on practical solutions to the opportunity and the challenge of just transition in the private and public sector. And here today, this morning, we have a fantastic array of speakers to give you real live insights about how public development banks, MDBs and others can really move forward on just transitions around climate change and the particular role, the important role of social investments in that. It's 10 years since just transition was included in the Paris Agreement, 10 years since we had the International Labour Organization guidelines on just transition. And we also have real action on the ground, and I think we're going to profile some of that today. We have guidelines, in fact, from MDBs. A number of leading MDBs have signed guidelines on just transition. So the purpose of today is really for you to really understand the strategic case for just transition and the role of public development banks, particularly in this context of Financing Common Summit, to really give some concrete examples of what it means on the ground in terms of public finance, and then to really further develop the FIX coalition of social investments. We have three parts to this discussion. First, we're going to kick off with some opening remarks from Governor Carlo Monticelli, Governor of the Council of Europe Bank, co-host of the FIX coalition of social investment. Then we'll have two panels. I'll be moderating an expert panel with contributions from South Africa's Presidential Climate Commission, Agence Française de Développement, African Development Bank, European Investment Bank, and the International Labour Organization. And then I'll pass it to Valerie Schmidt from the ILO, who will facilitate the second panel. So hope that's going to excite you, inspire you to take more action on just transition. And with that, I'd like to hand over to you, Carlo, to kick us off. Thank you very much.
Talking in my sleep, I see you in my dreams, living how we want.
Dear friend of the FIX, I am delighted to open this session on just transition and social investment. This theme is very close to my heart. It is central to the activity of the Council of Europe Development Bank, the CEB for short, which is the only bank which has an exclusively social mandate. The fundamental concept underpinning the idea of just transition is as straightforward as it is powerful. Social inclusion is a necessary condition for the long-term sustainability and the political viability of policies that address transition. This is easier said than done, but it must be done. And the challenge that we all must address and must address together is to find new ways, new solutions for this to be the case. And of course, in thinking about just transition, the obvious place to start is a social investment. For the last 7 decades, the CEB has worked with our member countries to finance projects in education, employment, health and social housing to ensure that the most vulnerable of our societies are not left behind. This is the reason why in 2021 we launched, together with the Agence Française de Développement, the Coalition for Social Investment, which brings us here today. With around 30 members, and most notably the ILO as a sponsor, the coalition is committed to increasing the volume and improving the quality of social investment globally. But going back to the theme of the session, what is just transition? There is no single definition, simply because there is no silver bullet, no one-size-fits-all policy or set of policy that protect the most vulnerable when transition policies are implemented. As a label, just transition was born with the notion of transition to the green economy, to emphasize that policies that are needed to address climate change must be complemented with with policies to address the economic and social disruptions caused by the climate policies themselves, emphasizing the issues of fairness and social equities. And let me stress again, without addressing the vulnerabilities of specific groups, climate action risks losing their vital support and then really being stopped altogether. A just transition is therefore not only desirable, it is indispensable, and it is a key enabler for achieving climate objectives that benefit us all. But it is a no-brainer to understand that the same concept and the need for complementary policies to protect the weakest part of the population equally apply to the unprecedented challenges that the world is facing in addition to climate change. Let me just quote two. Digitalization with artificial intelligence and population aging. These are major changes, major conditions that have to be addressed with policies, and these policies must be complemented with action to ensure that the most vulnerable are protected. Multilateral development banks, like the SEB, and public development banks play a vital role in financing the social investment which are necessary to help transition policies to be fair and equitable. In a word, just. Enhancing our ability to define just transition policies and investment is a critical step to identify the concrete projects, because ultimately we are in the business of focusing on concrete projects that need to be prioritized to deliver social impact and inclusion, and do it as fast as it is necessary. I am confident that today's discussion will help identify concrete solutions, showcasing examples of how multilateral and public development banks are delivering social investment that help make just transitions a reality. Let me conclude by thanking the co-organizer of this session, Agence Française de Développement, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, the European Investment Bank, and the International Labour Organization. Thank you to all again.
Thank you, Carlo, for that. I'd now like to turn to Crispin Olver, who is the Deputy Chairperson of the Presidential Climate Commission of South Africa. Very good to have you here, Crispin, particularly since essentially South Africa has been really at the heart of really driving just transition, both nationally but also internationally. There's more done here probably than anywhere else in the world. And the PCC is a multi-stakeholder body reporting into the President. So I'd really like to get your thoughts and your wisdom, Crispin, that at this particular moment, what do you see as the sort of really core business case, the strategic case for just transition, and sort of how that is coming to life here in South Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Hello. Oh, morning, everyone. Thank you for the question, Nick. So, I mean, as we all know, we are in a global environment where there are significant headwinds, and a whole range of banks are scrubbing the word DEI from their websites. And maybe it's important at this moment to restate the business case for the just transition. And it's something we all know, but I'd like to put it back on the table. I mean, we are facing profound shifts in national economies and the global economy as a whole. And those shifts are driven by a number of factors. Decarbonization is one of them, so we're all very actively transitioning energy systems. There's a broader green tech revolution that's underpinning changes, and it's mixed up with changes like AI, which are fundamentally shifting the nature of the workforce. And, as in any industrial revolution, there are winners and losers created. And what we stand to lose is that global inequality and inequalities within nations are going to get accentuated by these changes. And we're going to see many of the development gains that we've made in the last century rolled back. So the principle of the just transition is that there's got to be an equitable sharing of risks and responsibilities. That those that are least responsible for the problem that we're addressing should not be carrying the burden of responding to it. And for all of us, developing countries and developed countries, I mean, I don't see the just transition as only a developing country term. We all are needing to think about, how do we transition our economies so that we're able to sustainably create jobs and livelihoods into the future? How do we prepare our labor force for what's coming? So build the human resource development and skill systems to equip them for the role that they have to play. How do we put the social support mechanisms in? There's going to be an enormous amount of churn within the labor market, and people are going to face gaps as they transition from one job to another, and some are going to be squeezed out completely. So how do we put the social safety nets and basic services and access to healthcare, et cetera, in place to cushion people? And these are important interventions because it ultimately contributes to the productivity of our labor market. So if you're wanting effective workforce for the future, you need to be investing in them. So there are strong economic spin-offs from it. And very importantly, it's integral to the political economy of the transition in each of our countries. Basically, governments are going to get thrown out of office and transition policies are going to be overturned if we're not taking everyone along with us. So the very sustainability of this transition rests on it being just. I want to emphasize the last one. So we always see these two parts to the just transition. One is equity and distributional issues, and the other is a procedural justice component. The shorthand term is inclusion, bringing all stakeholders to the table, and particularly making sure that those who are most at risk are able to have a seat at the table and input into the processes. And this is important not just because it's the right thing to do and it's just and equitable. It also unlocks the capacities of all those stakeholders in this transition. And it's impossible to conceive of a transition on the scale that it's taking place just using the limited toolbox that government has to bring to the table. These transitions are only going to work with the active drive and investment and innovation that the private sector brings, with the accountability mechanisms and grassroots development practices that civil society has, with labor organizations articulating the needs of workforces as they transition. So we need everyone at the table to make the transition succeed. So in short, Nick, a potted business case for the just transition.
a very powerful business case, and I think you underscored the importance of this from a principle point of view, the importance of bringing people to the table, and then actually dealing with this in questions of justice, distributive justice, and social inclusion, and so on, decent jobs, and so on. We're here at FIX. This is a gathering of international public development banks. Briefly, if there are sort of any particular insights you have or recommendations you have about the role of PDBs in this process, and then we'll move on.
So PDBs have a fundamentally important role, and it's not just at a project level. So, I mean, it's very, very important, the work that's been going on, you know, including through the Coalition for Social Investment, in terms of bringing justice components to traditional lending and development practices. But far more importantly is moving funds into pure, you know, into more pure just transition projects. And, you know, typically these are harder to fund. The revenue streams are a little bit less easy to secure and identify. Many of the more gritty community-based projects are smaller scale. They, you know, are considered insignificant for many of the large banks to even pay attention to. So we need to think of creative mechanisms in country to start to move concessional lending and private finance into traditional just transition type projects. And, you know, this would be anything that is supporting economic diversification, bottom-up community development, resilience building from the ground up. These are all areas where we need to think a little bit more creatively, do a lot more blending and risk mitigation, aggregate projects, look at pooled mechanisms to get them in. So, you know, we want to see PDBs far more actively investing directly in just transition type projects.
Crispin, thank you so much for setting out that challenge, and I think also what is needed really from the MDBs and the PDBs around the table. Thank you so much, Crispin. I'd now like to turn to Audrey Rochkov, the Regional Director for Southern Africa at the AFD, already mentioned as one of the co-hosts of this meeting. So, Audrey, you're welcome. And you're a former Secretary General of FIX as a whole. So I think maybe just to kick off, really good to get your sense about how this issue of just transition and social investment really came to life in FIX. And then maybe we could go into some specific examples following on from what Crispin is saying about what AFD is doing about just transition. So please.
Thank you very much. Good morning, all. Thank you, Nick, for the question. Indeed, I was working on the Finance in Common Summit back in 2019. And I'm sure my fellow panelists from all the public development banks, because with public development banks, I mean national, regional, multilateral development banks, they will agree with me that we have a role in driving the transformation of our economies. And we have a role in making sustainability the new norm. I will come back to it. The system we have created with the Finance in Common initiative was to gather all the public development banks, but also to talk with all the ecosystem of public or development financer from civil society, academia, private sector, international organization. Because we feel that we are working on what are now global challenges, whether health, education, job creation, reduction of inequalities, and we have to work together and we have to strengthen the cooperation among us. So indeed, as Carlo Monticelli said, we have created, set up this coalition for social investment. And the idea was to build the resilience of our economies, because an equal access to basic services such as health and education is a foundation for economic growth. investing in human capital is certainly a prerequisite for sustainable growth, just like any infrastructure project. So yes, the role of public development banks in the broader financial system is to promote sustainability and inclusivity and to bring together all the development financiers around the same objectives.
Thank you for that introduction, Audrey. But you're not also just involved in this coordination role. AFD is a major funder, I think also in here in South Africa. So it'd be really good at how those imperatives on just transition and social investment are sort of translated into your action, your portfolio.
Absolutely. AFD is absolutely committed in supporting the transitions. But first of all, you know, France is part of the Just Energy Transition Partnership with South Africa. So in this context, France committed to provide 1 billion euros of financing aligned with the South African JET investment plan. And it is in this framework that we have recently signed a policy-based loan fully focused on the just dimensions of the JET. Together with our partners from the PCC, from the Presidency, from the National Treasury, and many other stakeholders, we developed an operation that is designed to support the social outcomes of the JET. So this is around skills, around job creation, around economic diversification and energy affordability. What is interesting here is that it's a 400 million euros loan, and this is the biggest ever provided by AFD since its creation more than 80 years ago. So I guess it's enough to demonstrate how committed we are to the just social dimensions of the transitions. But more importantly, this amount has been qualified as climate finance. And this is really, really interesting because it shows how we are progressing from climate finance to transition finance. Because, of course, it's more and more difficult to draw a line between what is climate finance, what is development finance. And as I said at the very beginning, our vision is to make sustainability the new norm. And I guess whether it's climate or social, it's around sustainability. So my main message, and I stop here, is supporting a transition, an energy transition, is a chance, is an opportunity to transform the economic and social model of an economy. It has been already said. And climate and social agendas are not competing. They are reinforcing each other. And we need to progress on this road. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And I think it was really good that you followed Crispian, because I think the loan that you have just made, the 400 million euros, I think addressed that issue of actually specific transition projects. And as you were saying, particularly for the banks around the table, this qualifies as climate finance. So this is really important because of all the tagging work that all the banks do to know where this fits in your portfolio, and that you can make this social dimension so important. When the lights went down, it wasn't a signal for you to go to sleep, so please do listen carefully. This is an active working session. So I'd like to thank you so much, Audrey. Move down to Leila Farah Mokadem, who's Director General of South Africa at the African Development Bank. Very good, welcome to you, and really good to have you. It'd be really good to follow on from Audrey and looking at the action, concrete examples, to really get your insights later on the actions that the African Development Bank has been taking on just transition in your countries right here in this country. So Leila, please.
Thank you very much, Nick, and thank you for inviting the African Development Bank. I think let me start by how do we understand just transition in the African context. So a just transition in Africa must be defined within the continent's unique socio-economic realities and development priorities. So unlike the industrialized nations whose primary focus is reducing fossil fuel dependence, so in Africa we must balance climate action with equitable economic development and ensuring no one is left behind and ensuring that we are not, these communities are not put in the losers, group, as, my colleague has said. So if we look at the key considerations that have triggered how the bank is also on the longer term, addressing those challenges. So we are talking about transition when 600 million people in Africa lack electricity. So, and 78% of them, they cannot even afford $5 a month for solar panel. So making affordable and reliable energy a priority alongside decarbonization is critical, and hence the Mission 300, African Development Bank and World Bank, which committed to the access of 300 million people to electricity, including rural, clean cooking by 2030. So this is one. Second, economic diversification. So if we have Africa in terms of private sector, where the informal sector is up to 40% of the GDP, employing 60 to 80% of the workforce. So we need to tackle that. And all our programs and projects are, focusing on economic diversification and investing in the enablers of economic diversification and competitiveness, infrastructure, energy, water, etc., agriculture, agribusiness, digital technology, etc. So, and the third, aspect is how, because you have Africa with youth population that is growing. The average age is 19 years old. Sometimes it's 60, 65% of the population. So it means that we need to retrain and upskill workers, particularly women and youth, and we have, programs to do that. So let me maybe go to the collaboration with MDBs and how we need also at the beginning to have this just transition framework, so to ensure that just transition principles are embedded in the African development operations, which we did, project design and financing mechanisms. So it's a cross-cutting issue, and it also, demonstrates the bank's commitment to earmark the just transition. We have, I have here some cases, the case of Uganda, where, for instance, conducting a socioeconomic impact study on the transition to electric vehicles and assess job creation, income effects, environmental benefits has led to a more deeper program for supporting skills development and skills mismatch, etc. And just transition extends beyond energy, so it applies to multi-sector and geographies. And in particular, the countries directly dependent on fossil fuels, and we have many in Africa, will need different strategies from those not reliant on fossil fuels. So the bank is there at the dialogue level, reforms level. We have provided also the, focused energy transition budget support to South Africa, I think 500 million this year. Again, we are assessing it at the institutional level, at supporting also the private sector entrepreneurs among youth population and women. Thank you.
Thanks so much. You mentioned the priority around youth unemployment.
Est-ce que vous pouvez passer une minute ou quelques secondes pour éclairer sur les questions des jeunes? L'emploi des jeunes est très important. La BAD a mis en place une stratégie décennale pour une stratégie de transition juste, c'est une question transversale dans tous nos programmes. J'aimerais souligner quelques programmes. Nous avons un programme pour l'emploi des jeunes, pour créer des millions d'emplois. Nous sommes en train aussi de former des jeunes. Nous voulons atteindre 25 millions d'emplois. Nous avons mis en place un partenariat avec ILO un système pour s'assurer que les projets de la BAD maximisent la création de l'emploi pour les jeunes. Et bien sûr, nous avons le fonds multi-bailleurs qui se focalise sur l'emploi de jeunes pour s'appuyer sur l'appui technique et le renforcement de capacités pour
important initiative at the African Development. We have put in place the Youth Entrepreneurship Investment Banks. So I will not go into details what is it, but you know, its name itself speaks for itself. So, and I can provide more information on that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Leila. Thanks so much for bringing that focus on real people, real people, particularly women here in Africa. So thank you so much. I'm going to move to Europe, to you, Ambroise Fayol, Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Welcome. Thank you so much. Really good to get your inputs to this as a leading MDB. The EIB has developed an approach, a strategic approach to just transition. It'd be really good to hear your lessons from that for an international audience. What have you learned as the EIB from funding just transition? And then maybe we'll get a bit later about your work outside of Europe with your international partners. So really just to get your strategic insights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And does it work? Yeah, it works. And let me combine the answer of what we do inside and what we do outside Europe. I would say that our position relies on two strong beliefs. The first belief is let us learn from our mistakes. And in Europe, we have made mistakes in the decommissioning of coal mines, for example, decades ago. But it is still in the mines. It's not a surprise that the commissioner that has pushed so much for the just transition mechanism was Frans Timmermans, who was the son of a mine worker. My colleague at the management committee of EIB, who is in charge of the energy lending policy, is the son of a Swedish coal mine worker. So that is in the minds of many people. How can we avoid to repeat mistakes we have done? And the second belief that we have, actually, Crispian made a point on that, and I agree completely. There will be no energy transition if it is not just. And that means we need to find ways to finance projects that will allow the energy transition to be just. Inside Europe, we have done that through a mechanism that is called the Just Transition Mechanism and the Just Transition Fund that allows to develop projects where you mix grants from the European Commission, loans from EIB, mobilization from other partners to finance, urban regeneration projects, renewable energy projects, these kind of things, linked to decommissioning or to projects that are. This is called the Public Sector Loan Facility. This is a very good success. Actually, the money is exhausted, so we are going to replenish it at the European level. And it works really efficiently in countries but it goes from Poland, the Czech Republic, Greece, to France. So it's something that is relatively large. What we also do at EIB, without the support of grants from the European Commission, is to support also projects that are really projects on helping the transition and the phase out. We do that in particular in Germany, a very interesting project, a big one, 150 million euros, which is called Lusatia, which is to help a region that has to phase out from lignite with projects that will include renewable energy, public transport, health, everything related to economic diversification, basically. So that's what we do inside Europe. It remains a very important element of our policy because we want not to repeat mistakes we have done and because we think it is very important for the success of our ambition to become the first continent to be climate neutral by 2050. Outside Europe, we don't have the same mechanism, but we have the same ambition, I would say. And for that, we are indeed doing two things. First is financing projects, especially in the context of the Just Energy Transition Package. We do that here in particular in South Africa with 1 billion investment to support the transition and the phase out of mines. We do that in other geographies where there is this, but we can actually develop that in other geographies. And we have developed another concept, which is not the just transition, but which is just resilience. Because one of the problems that you often hear, especially in Africa, is to some extent, you give money to the sinners. The more you have contributed to pollution, the more you get money. We are very poor, we don't have actually mines, and we don't get anything. And when you look at the way this is phrased, we came to the conclusion we need to add a just resilient concept that is climate adaptation finance for those countries, or LDCs in particular, or seeds, those people, indigenous people, in some countries women, that are the most affected by the climate change and that have the most limited capacity to deal with it and to adapt to it. And that's what we try to develop then in terms of project. We have an ambitious objective at EIB globally in terms of adaptation because unfortunately adaptation is and will become a bigger and bigger part of our climate change project financing.
Thank you so much, Ambroise, for making clear that the just transition is personal. It's about real people, including your staff, and also extending the scope of our discussion from the issues of carbon and clean energy to adaptation. So thank you very much. I'd like to turn to you, Mia Seppo, International Labour Organization, the last in this round of panel. And obviously, the International Labour Organization, really the grandmother of Just Transition, the guidelines for Just Transition, and working very closely on this particular coalition of social investment, really inspiring, I think, so much of the work across the sector. So maybe to start, Amir, it'd be really good to get your guidance and the messages, I think you as ILO, as partners of many public development banks, the messages you would like to share to encourage greater action. I think we've seen some really good examples, but greater action from public development banks.
Thank you, Nick. And first, let me just note that it's really encouraging that it's not only you who have pointed to the ILO Just Transition Guidelines, but previous speakers have referred to them as well. And we're very pleased to note that in the NDB group, we have institutions that have actually distilled from these guidelines what is relevant and fit for purpose for financial institutions. So there is no need to reinvent the wheel. These guidelines are available, and obviously ILO is happy to extend the partnerships that we have to really look at how can they be taken into account in your strategic frameworks. Now, it's important to put the guidelines into practice, so I would also like to draw your attention to the specific tools for banking and investment activities that ILO has developed in the Just Transition Finance tool, which has been developed in partnership with many, including UNEP FI. These tools explain what social risk and opportunities the net zero transition poses on the financial sector and guides financial institutions to act on them. So it's structured along organizational processes of financial institutions to embed just transition in the financial product development, in client screening, in due diligence processes, and in impact monitoring. So, Nick, we are happy with the partnerships that we have, and we obviously stand ready to extend these with others in this conversation.
And particularly focusing on social investment, a big concern of the ILO. We know that just transition is not going to happen without more social investment. How can partnering with the ILO help PDBs move forward on this? And particularly, you have an international initiative, the Global Accelerator, I think. I mean, it'd be good to get a sense of maybe some of the examples you'd like to profile for this audience.
Right. I think many of the speakers and many of the conversations point to this moment that we're in. So let's just reflect on what the world looks like. We have 4 billion people with no form of social protection. We have 2 billion workers in informal jobs. And we have a real crisis in terms of youth that are neither in employment, education, or training, the so-called NEET number. So the transitions that we are talking about are taking place in a world of growing concerns around poverty, inequality, informality, and lack of prospects for the many. So the thing really is, how do we make sure that these transitions actually reduce the challenges and not exacerbate them? And Crispian made a very powerful case on the business case for just transition. It is a business case for fairness and stability, and that stability obviously matters for investment. So it's important to look at governments and their partners like PDBs to recognize that do no harm is not good enough. It really is a question of seizing the opportunity that these transitions provide to make sure that they do not exacerbate inequalities. Reference has been made to the many transitions that we're actually talking about. So it's the transition to a low carbon economy, it's the digitalization and AI, and it's the demographic transition that Leila spoke about. How do we make sure that we tackle both this challenge of aging societies and the potential of the demographic dividend in the continent that we're in, which has a young population? What is that investment in human development capital that is needed? So we need to look at this from the perspective of how can we make sure this transition lifts all people? What is the formula? People need decent jobs and they need universal social protection. So the PDBs then, what concretely can be done? It is about how to increase the social impact of the investment by ensuring that it comes with decent jobs, it comes with skills development, it comes with support to micro and small enterprises, and it comes with social protection for all. And it comes with looking into whether it's working with the private sector or financial institutions, looking at everything through the lens of jobs and employment intensity of the investment, be that in roads or energy or agriculture. And let me also refer you, and I'm happy Leila actually mentioned the AFDB Youth Skills and Jobs Marker, which is a good example that probably others can look at as well. Second is to look at supporting policies that work based on strong public institutions. So how do we look at the public investment that strengthens national social protection systems, that strengthens skills development programs, and that is linked with active labor market policies. And the third thing not to forget is whole of government approaches. The importance, obviously, of workers and employers' organizations, the key stakeholders in the world of work, which need to be included in how we craft the policy mix to look at these transitions, to deliver transitions that are socially acceptable and sustainable. As the previous speaker said, no energy transition will happen if it's not just. Now, in terms of initiatives, I've referred to a number of our guidelines. Let me also refer to the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions, which is very much this inclusive discussion of a range of ministries, bringing them into the same conversation, a number of UN agencies, and an increasing number of banks as well. So in the Pathfinder countries, Albania, Uzbekistan, Namibia, Malawi, we are in dialogue with the MDBs and the PDBs already. We are also working with the World Bank in 9 countries. So in addition to the collaboration, ILO, with UN partners, of course, we're also bringing in our extensive data to support the analysis and looking at both our macroeconomic and micro simulation tools. This will help to evaluate and maximize that social impact of the investment, which I think we are all here to really figure out. So, thank you, Nick, and back to you.
Mia, thank you so much for that, and particularly highlighting that there are real Pathfinder countries working on you with the Global Accelerator. So, thanks to the panelists for kicking us off, to Crispian making the real clear strategic business case, highlighting the need from this from a political economy point of view, unblocking capacity. To you, Audrey, highlighting the funding that you're providing, the just transition finance is climate finance, really important here in South Africa and elsewhere. Leila, I think the African perspective, particularly the focus on youth, women, this is really about real people. Ambroise, I think learning from mistakes, this is a learning process, doing things better this time around in terms of transformation, and also that this is essential for the ambitions we all have for climate action, both within home territories and in partner countries. And then I think, Mia, I liked the phrase you used, sort of, do no harm is not good enough. I think that's a very low bar. We should be doing much, much better. This is really about real people, the dignity of humanity, and making sure that that comes through. So I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking our panelists. I'm going to hand over to Valerie.
So thank you so much, Nick. Thank you so much to all the high-level panelists for guiding us through this really interesting discussion that will certainly echo in now the expert panel discussion that is starting now. And let's hope also that these 2 discussions on just transitions and social investment will impact concretely operations on the ground. So in this expert panel, we would like to delve deeper into some of the issues that were touched upon in the high-level panel, and we would like to give the audience more detailed examples of how some of this innovative work that many of you are doing can really change something and can really ensure that climate, economic and demographic shifts create opportunities rather than deepening inequalities. So we will start with Kate Phillips. Kate, you are the program lead of the Presidential Employment Stimulus in South Africa. Your program includes a vast array of measures in many sectors of the economy, such as agriculture, infrastructure, tourism. Yesterday you told us about education as well. It targets women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Could you tell us what is different about this new generation of public employment programs like the PS? Is it more effective in addressing today's challenges compared to the older programs? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And the first panel really excellently set out the case. And here is an example of one of the ways in which we can give concrete effect to what needs to be done. And of course, it's one instrument amongst a basket of instruments that are needed in community contexts. So my focus is on the role of public employment programs in this context. And yes, I think public employment, sometimes called public works, has become, if I can call it, a bit of a Cinderella of development strategies in a context in which sometimes, and in some parts of the world, such programs have not met a high bar in terms of decent work, inspiring work, transformative work. In the context of the COVID pandemic in South Africa, we had a unique opportunity to reimagine what public employment can look like. And I want to speak briefly about the different elements of what that reimagining is and how that, I think, applies very much to the context of the just transition. We have been supported by the AFD in supporting a pivot towards applying the lessons from that experience to the just transition context. So I think the first element of reimagining public employment is to start with participants and why it matters so much for participants to have the opportunity to work. I think that in the context of the just transition, we can all agree that transitions from the jobs of the past to the jobs of the future will not be seamless on market-based terms. And in that context, there is a gap that needs to be filled, and that gap needs to be filled through instruments of public investment, through public employment. It's not just the people directly affected, it's their communities, because in every context where jobs are being lost, there are ripple effects in communities and local economies, and we need instruments that support those communities for exactly the reasons Crispian was outlined. It's pivotal to the sustainability of the just transition. We know, certainly in South Africa, the negative impacts of high levels of unemployment on communities, psychosocial impacts that then ripple through communities as a whole with negative implications for people and for local economies. So the first element of reimagining public employment programs is making sure that the work is meaningful, that it is developmental for participants, often transformative for participants. It also can encompass all skills levels. It does not have to be unskilled manual labor, important as it is to include a component of that in different contexts. But there is not a skill in the spectrum of skills that cannot be deployed in the interests of the public good. And so the challenge in designing public employment programs is to identify what are the capabilities locally and how to deploy those local, those skills and capabilities. In terms of reimagining, we need to reimagine the social value that can be created through work. Work creates social value. When people are unemployed, that is value that is lost. We need instruments to unlock that value, and public employment can do so. So one of our straplines is that there's no shortage of work to be done to improve the quality of life in communities. There's no shortage of work to be done, yes, in infrastructure, but also in services, in things like care, in food security, in biodiversity protection, in combating gender-based violence. There's work to be done in these and many other areas. There are people willing and able to do that work. Public employment is an instrument to unlock that willingness, that agency, that ability, and that social value. The implications are also for local economies. So these are also a form of local stimulus, a bottom-up stimulus, not a trickle-down one. An investment in local economies that supports local spending, that supports the local enterprises that are at risk from the loss of jobs in the transition. So this is supporting the informal sector, small enterprises. We have data that shows how, supported again by AFD, but we have data that shows how this is trickling up into the economy as a whole. And in the process, it's also a redistributive mechanism because it's applying resources to people and places that are excluded. So how have we done this? I will briefly give two examples from, as was indicated, quite a wide range of programs. We can do this at scale. We've done it at scale. We've reached over 1 million young people in South Africa in 4 years, placed in 23,000 schools as teachers' assistants. How simple is that? Every country in the world has schools that need more resources, that can benefit, both learners and teachers can benefit from the energy of young people in their space, and we've seen that. This program has employed over 1 million young people, giving them capacities, meaningful work, access to networks, sense of self-respect and pride, status in the community. And we have research that shows that it has impacted positively on the learning outcomes in school in specific instances where we've been able to test this. It has a 97% approval rating from principals. This is so easily replicable anywhere in the world. The other program I will speak very briefly to is our Social Employment Fund. It is actually run by one of our DFIs, the Industrial Development Corporation, funded through the Fiscus. The concept of social employment is, again, this concept that there's no shortage of work to be done to make communities a better place. What it also does is recognize that there are community-based organizations in every community in the country that are cash-strapped, that are doing good work, that are doing work for the common good, and that need support. So the Social Employment Fund supports organizations that are already working at community level to do more of what they are doing to create employment and to do it at scale. In 2.5 years, it's reached 140,000 young people, not just young people, but mostly young people and mostly women, and it is doing the kind of work that I referenced. Combating gender-based violence, we have paralegals in 150 communities, food security work, catchment management work, care work, early childhood development, support to education. Whatever communities identify as urgent and pressing for them, this instrument can support, and I'll stop there.
Inspiring sharing speech, etc. So could you really tell us very quickly, because of course we have other panelists that we want to listen to, how public development banks, and you mentioned already several of them, AFD and another one that is in South Africa, if I understand well. So how public development banks can really support this type of programs like the PEST and the different examples you gave. Thank you.
I think the public development banks will probably understand better than I do how they can support, and I hope that what I've triggered is all kinds of ideas of how they can do so. But yes, we already do have support through the AFD. We have had a lot of support from the EU in this process. Our Fiscus has provided support, and the Industrial Development Corporation has supported. Obviously, a lot of this, well, the public employment itself is grant financed. It's at this point mainly through the Fiscus. It's not really a grant, but it's not loan financing. But right now, one of the new frontiers for us is the recognition from our experience, in fact, that public employment programs can also support enterprise development at the local level. And we are seeing this in practice. A very strong interface emerging between participation in these programs and participation in livelihood and self-employment and other activity. So in the Social Employment Fund, for example, we have over 12,000 of the current participants engaged in complementary livelihood and economic activity outside of the public employment program, but supported by them. And right now, we're engaged in conversations with a range of the people in the room about mechanisms of support to that next level of economic inclusion for participants. And we hope to take that further with partners in the room.
Thank you so much, Kate. Thanks a lot. I think everybody took good notes of these examples and how they can really increase their impact on the social development together with economic development and transitions. So thanks a lot. We will now turn to Jérôme Mutumba, who is the Chief of Marketing and Corporate Affairs at the Development Bank of Namibia. So it's a national public development bank that supports the creation of jobs by providing financing for young entrepreneurs in Namibia. So Namibia is currently undergoing several economic and social transitions. The country faces challenges such as systemic youth unemployment, as the representative from African Development Bank was alluding to. Also energy needs, formalization of the economy, high inequality. So Jérôme Mutumba, could you tell us how the Development Bank of Namibia how it manages to align its operations with really the national priorities of the government and the social inclusion and just transition. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Valerie. Good afternoon, everybody. I think it's quite an honor for us to be part of this engagement this afternoon. I just probably wanted to start off by setting the context. The Development Bank is actually one of the public institutions that are charged with financing economic activities in the country to help with the national agenda that actually looks at economic transformation. So one of the key issues that we have done is always to have strategic plans that are aligned with our national strategic priorities. We have done a lot of investment in the area of the social sector. We have actually got into partnership with local authorities for the development of lands for low-cost housing. We've actually been very intentional in creating opportunities for young people. We have actually crafted a national SME strategy that naturally hinges on 3 pillars. One of the key challenges that we have seen is access to finance in terms of the young entrepreneurs. So Development Bank has been at the forefront of the formulation of the national SME financing strategy. So what that actually strategy does is to focus on 3 critical pillars, and that is the credit guarantee scheme, the venture capital fund, and then we're looking at the mentoring and coaching program. So this has really helped us to address some of the fundamental needs of young people, particularly entrepreneurs. So Val may probably stop here for now, and then I'll come in at a later stage. But I think the key issue for us is that we continue to see some challenges in terms of financing some of the social sector. We have also seen our NPLs and non-performing loans are relatively high in that particular space. So we'll be seeking natural opportunities for grant funding and also some shareholder recapitalization to help, particularly with some of the programs that are targeted at young people in terms of upskilling the young people to take advantage of business opportunities in the country.
Thank you so much, Jérôme, for sharing with us how you help ensure really that the young generation in Namibia can really access decent jobs through skills development, access to entrepreneurship, and so many development opportunities. And of course, this has an impact, a positive impact on the whole economy, and can really benefit, ensure that Namibia can benefit from this demographic dividend that comes when countries invest in the young generation. So we learned from the previous speakers that public development banks have really a key role to play to facilitate transitions for vulnerable populations and younger generations. And I would like to turn to Giorgio Massotti. So you are the head of business partnerships at CDP. So just transition and social inclusion are key strategic priorities for CDP. And my question is, how does a public development bank like CDP manage to embed a just transition into its development finance activities to pursue also climate mitigation and adaptation objectives together with positive socioeconomic impact? Thank you, Giorgio.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Valerie, and it was really an honor to represent CDP here in this discussion, this important discussion on a topic which is becoming more and more central in the development, public development banks, I would say in the entire world. So, as most of you will know, CDP is Italy's national promotion institution that has been founded 170 years ago, working mostly on the domestic market. But at the same time, over the past few years, we've started our international development finance operations. And this means 2 things. First, we can leverage what we've learned on the domestic market, the good and bad things, obviously, that we learned. And at the same time, it means that we can, at the same time, take from best practices, international best practices. This privilege of starting fresh means that we could explore and apply what is happening in the market and what the best practices of the PDBs. I would like to share two main messages. The first one is that the just transition means connecting the dots among the SDGs in everything that we do. And the second one is that the just transition means also fostering a multi-stakeholder dialogue among all the participants, so governments, civil society, private sector, international organizations, and obviously public development banks. On the first message, connecting the dots, just and socially impactful transition means many things. I will mention at least two. On one hand, addressing employment and social aspects of the green transition, and at the same time also promoting socioeconomic inclusions through climate-friendly solutions. This is very important in certain geographies. For example, it was mentioned in Africa, as mentioned by African Development Bank, the importance of not only thinking of removing or reducing CO2 emissions, but also designing new solutions in a climate-friendly way. The 17 Sustainable Development Goals offer an important guiding light, and we need to think holistically about the SDGs in order to promote a just and socially impactful transition. Green transition projects may have SDG 13, for example, as the main objective, because they reduce CO2 emissions, but we should always ask ourselves, what is the impact on SDG 8, for example? How are we addressing the jobs that will be lost by shifting to renewable energy? What reskilling or skill development programs are we putting in place? And it's not just a matter, as it was said by other panelists, of we do one thing, but we make sure we do not harm the other thing. We need to think holistically in an interconnected way. How to do it? Strategically and operationally. And this is a framework, a multi-level framework that a number of public development banks are applying, also in the context of financing common. From a strategic level, I'll start from that. Just transition, for example, in our case of CDP, is one of the key priorities of the new strategic plan of CDP, which has been just recently approved by our board of directors, promoting climate change mitigation and adaptation measures while adopting a fair process that obviously leaves no one behind. And this is closely interlinked with other priorities of our strategic plan, social and territorial cohesion, economic development, competitivity. So already embedding in the strategic plan this multidimensional factor obviously is the starting point. We also have a CDP, an ESG plan, which complements and articulates how the strategic plan looks holistically at the ESG factors and obviously at the SDGs too. But let's now move to the operational level. How do we translate this strategy into practice? For each project we finance, we evaluate ex ante the contribution to the SDGs as part of a risk-return impact analysis, which is common practice and best practice in development finance. It also speaks to a certain extent to the context of the business case that Cristian has evoked before. And when we do that, then we review also the ex post impact monitoring and assessment in a consistent way, so ex ante and ex post. Let me give an example. We have dedicated climate envelopes, we have dedicated funds to support climate projects. So the main driver of those projects that we finance through those envelopes is climate. But in the impact measurement, assessment and measurement model, we also measure the social and sustainable development co-benefits, with focus on specific indicators such as the job creation, skill development, women and youth inclusion, financial inclusion, reskilling, and so on. Obviously, we know there is a lot to do. We're learning from as we're doing more, but this is a fundamental aspect. The interconnection among SDGs is fundamental to progress on just transition. Let me move to the second key message, which is the multi-stakeholder element of this. Let me start with governments. We know that NDCs, National Determined Contribution, and National Adaptation Plans offer actionable central entry points to ensure consistency across different policy domains. We also know, and ILO also mentioned it in several papers, that the just transition element is probably not yet enough present in the NDCs, but this is something that probably is required, is helpful in order to ensure that programs, comprehensive programs, like for example the Just Energy Transition programs, embed more and more the element of just and socially impactful transition into the green transition. CDP also participates in JETP programs, also in other parts of the world. We're witnessing this element, and we're participating, obviously, to the groups that define the just transition or the just element of the green transition. Let me move to the other stakeholder, which is the civil society, and after me we'll have Gugu Xaba from Save the Children that will provide an interesting perspective. Civil society organizations obviously have in-depth knowledge of the context where we, as public development banks, intervene. So they are very well positioned, obviously, in understanding how we, as financiers, can embed the socially and the just and socially impactful elements or attributes in the green transition initiatives. CDP, as well, as part of its toolkit of building the international development finance operation, has also developed identity-defining tools to engage with civil society. An example, we have a proactive stakeholder engagement policy, which obviously means dialoguing with civil society, with all other stakeholders that we have. And just to give an example, with Save the Children, we work in Italy, for example, on financial education programs. Internationally, we're looking at opportunities to work on how to create climate-friendly solutions to promote children opportunities for education. But in a nutshell, I would say the engagement of multi-stakeholder, all stakeholders, government, civil society, even private sector, is fundamental. And PDBs obviously can play a role in supporting, facilitating this dialogue, but it's important to remember the centrality of people, of citizens in this dialogue. I just would like to conclude by thanking ILO and all the organizers for this opportunity, and I hope that this dialogue will continue, and this today will be a starting point of future discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Giorgio. Thank you so much. And so you have mentioned the importance of involving different stakeholders, including civil society, that are closer to people. So this is a very nice transition to Gugu Xaba, who is the CEO of Save the Children, South Africa, and that is doing, of course, a lot of work on ensuring that you can relieve young children and their families from poverty and reduce also the transmission of poverty to future generations. So could you explain the challenges and potential adverse impacts of climate change for children and their families and for the youth, and tell us also how a just transition can place these groups that are really at risk at the heart of the policy development process. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. And it's an honor to be sitting in the Just Transition and Social Investment panel. Save the Children strongly believes that the climate crisis is violation of the rights of children, and it is a crisis. We have seen this in 2.4 billion children globally that are affected. And 1/3 of children globally are exposed to heat waves on an annual basis. We also see about 43 million children that have their lives interrupted by displacement because of weather-related disasters. We have seen about 37% on an annual basis children that have disrupted education, children that are exposed to disease outbreaks because of the climate change. And currently, we are dealing with over 9 million girls that are affected by climate disasters. And the effect on children is the fact that some, because of poverty, because of stressors in the home, they find themselves being married too early. Children face violence in their homes because of the high pressure in their families, and the school dropouts and child labor. We have also seen that child-responsive climate finance has not provided the required scale in order to deal with some of these effects. We have, in the past 17 years, 2.4% of funding that came from multilaterals has only provided for the needs of children. And we strongly believe that this 2.4% is much underestimated. So we need more funding to go into the needs of children that are affected by climate change. And this we say because the most vulnerable children continues to increase. The impact of climate change affects them negatively, and yet programs that are set up are not prioritizing the needs of children. Instead, they are child blind. And in the past 10 years, the Business and Human Rights Resource Center has recorded over 200 allegations of human rights and child rights abuses, violations that are linked to 5 subsectors of the renewable energy, including its supply chain. And this record has an example on the fact that children that are working in artisanal cobalt mines are exposed to toxicity in terms of the substances that they're working with and the heavy metals that they are working with. And also they are unable to go to school or be educated. And all this that I'm describing can be avoided if we can all recognize children as child rights holders and making sure that we are involving them in decision-making on just transitions. And we are also ensuring that child rights becomes a guiding framework in how we visibly integrate just transition, financing, and planning. And in terms of the opportunities, I'd like to share 2 examples with you. Save the Children has been working, and it is an indication that collaborations with PDBs, DFIs, multilateral funding, civil society, academia, and community members, it works. And we have seen through Green Climate Fund that has contributed to providing for Save the Children to be able to work in Africa and in Asia. And this work has contributed to the transition to green energy for health structures, for education infrastructure, and for low carbon emissions in terms of agriculture practices. We have worked from Laos to Vanuatu to Zimbabwe to South Africa, where building green skills has been conducted to ensure that young people can access and perform jobs in the green space and be able to sustain their livelihoods. And this has also capacitated teachers. We have been able to do vocational training and work in with the private sector and local financial institutions to ensure that young people can be skilled. The second example I'd like to share is the fact that Save the Children Global Ventures has set up a Generation Empowerment Fund, which consists of a pipeline that is providing benefits for employing capital towards schools. And this strategy is basically an advancement to ensuring that there's clean energy in our communities, in the schools, in the health sector, and the adaptation is providing financing to financial institutions to support infrastructure in schools and climate vulnerable communities. And this also is underpinned by full participation of communities and impact frameworks. Central to this initiative is the fact that the collaboration that we have seen, as mentioned by Giorgio earlier on with CPD, is an initiative that is going to contribute to innovative financing and offer new spaces of opportunities to underpin and ensure that the shared values and objectives can be implemented through the collaboration. May I conclude by saying a just transition cannot be achieved without climate justice, without the rights of children. This means paying attention to children's rights, addressing their economic impacts, recognizing the role of shock responsive social protection, and ensuring that child protection, including the prevention of child labor, including making sure that children are at school, children have good health services, and we advocate for an increased learning of climate change and ensuring that green skills can be implemented. Save the Children will continually advocate for embedding climate change in policies, in financing, and we would like to have a joint effort in developing the shared tools, frameworks that can better estimate the contribution of climate change and investment in child-responsive outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Guruk Saba, for sharing what you are doing with a number of stakeholders, including CDP, on ensuring that the children's needs also addressed through the just transitions. So this, I guess this is an offer also to further discuss with the development banks that are in this room. Now I would like to turn to Hubert. Hubert, you are the lead economist at EIB. You are speaking to us today in your capacity of member of the MDB Just Transition Group. So we've heard a lot about various ways in which the development banks can shape really their operations to achieve just transition. Of course, as participants in this fix, our role and our goal is really to work towards the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, as mentioned several times by Giorgio. So to enhance our efforts, it's obviously crucial to understand how we can measure the impact of public development banks' operations on these different SDGs and the achievement of the Paris Agreement, and how we can also communicate this impact in a credible manner, and how we can also improve maybe the operations of public development banks to achieve the SDGs, especially the social outcomes that we are looking for. So over to you, Hubert. Thank you.
Many thanks, Valérie. So let me start by saying that 9 multilateral development banks agreed on 5 high-level principles for our support to just transition ahead of COP26 already. While firmly anchored in climate action as the trigger for our just transition efforts, the principles fall short. They stop short from a harmonized operational definition. Rather, they span a space of possibilities within which each MDB can unfold transformative projects according to our mandates, geographies of operation, climate action methodologies, and shareholder requests. Against this backdrop, which implies the mutual recognition of each partner's just transition definition, we started our joint work on results measurement for just transition activities last year. We reported on our preliminary findings in a workshop at COP29 and shared the gist of it in the November 2024 update of a joint MDB document that's called Common Approach to Measuring Climate Results, which is available online. Under the skillful coordination of our ADB colleagues, we first agreed on a few important prerequisites, notably that project promoters and countries need to show a credible intent to the net zero transition. They need to characterize the distributive impacts and opportunities of the transition in a planning process that we or PDBs are happy to support. And there needs to be a logic showing how the MDB intervention helps to manage the impacts and harness the opportunities. An important point here in passing is to say just transition interventions, they don't need to be 100% climate finance. Climate enabling finance also counts as long as there is no significant harm to climate and environmental objectives. We heard before that there will be no energy transition if it's not just. So take the example of a new vocational education training center that prepares young people both for green jobs or for jobs in the tourism sector, the computer gaming industry, or how to run a bakery. So it's green and not exclusively green jobs. and the other jobs are climate enabling as long as they do no significant harm. And finally, and most importantly, we agreed on 3 focus areas along which we classify our activities. Focus area 1 is called institutions and stakeholders, and that spans the heterogeneous range of our advisory work, policy advice for reforms, long-term strategy making, just transition planning, as well as hands-on financial and technical advisory in the preparation of specific investment projects. Focus area 2, we called employment, skills and livelihoods, concerns mostly projects where communities are the primary beneficiaries and often the borrower tend to be from the public sector. Here we will report on projects fostering education and skills, employment support, social protection measures, but also sustainable community infrastructure. Focus area 3, infrastructure and productivity, refers to economic diversification and productivity enhancing projects, mostly carried out by private sector counterparts in areas most impacted by the transition. Think of business development for small and medium enterprises, mining site repurposing and environmental rehabilitation, the rollout of low-carbon energy and transport infrastructure, energy efficiency measures, and decarbonization of carbon-intensive manufacturing processes. Our members submitted at least 1 project for each focus areas with a description of scope, inputs, outputs, outcomes, making for an illustrative set of case studies exemplifying the results indicators. The work that now lies ahead of us consists in comparing our individual lists of monitoring results and results indicators and distill from them a possible list of common indicators that we can commit on reporting to. Let me conclude on a personal note saying that I'm thrilled and honored to serve as the MDB Just Transition Subgroup's secretary this year and next. And we are very much aware that we are being watched, that we have been watched in the past, and we are happy to share the little we know jointly with the wider financial sector. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Hubert, for sharing what you are doing within this group and the importance of measuring this impact on just transition and really trying to having a common taxonomies, I guess, and to common measurement indicators. So I will now turn to our last speaker, Chantal Naidoo. Chantal, you are, you are the director of Rabia Transitions, and you're also the non-executive director of the Development Bank of Southern Africa. Rabia Transitions is a non-profit research initiative working towards a just and inclusive financial ecosystem that serves the transition needs of our time with dignity. So you have heard all the speakers today, and you have also a lot of experience through Rabia and through your role at DBSA. So I have a question for you. What, according to you, are the entry points for public development banks to really achieve a just transition outcome? Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Perhaps we step back in history a moment to understand public development banks and why they were in place in the first place. I think their history is to step into processes of change and lean in towards driving strong social cohesion and economic growth and development. Development by its nature can be quite disruptive, but public development banks in different countries and different geographies have both divided and united and reconciled. And in South Africa, our history of our public development banks, DBSA in particular, has been one that emerged from a checkered history into one that is actually reconciling the country through its investment portfolio. So with that in mind, I think the first thing I would say is, from a mandate perspective, public development banks are the development conscience of the financial system. I was sitting in one of yesterday's sessions where one of the speakers was speaking about some of the pitfalls of private sector mobilization. And it struck me that she said public development banks can't completely outsource the due diligence screening to the private sector, because the conscious of development sits with public development banks. So perhaps the first thing is to be a little bit like Alice in Wonderland. I always get the story wrong, but it's the lion and the courage. I think the lion's heart of public development banks needs to be quite big and quite strong, and remembering that that is its role. And I think in the heart of that, it's to bring dignified livelihoods into society, to make that happen. So if we think of justice and social aspects, in my view, that's always actually been a part of the fabric of development finance institutions, public development banks, both the MDBs and other development agencies as well. But transitions have a very particular disruptive effect. And where's the magic? I think the magic lies in the investment process, to a large extent, of how public development banks bring deals together. First of all, they have the knowledge of the development agenda. They are able to be policy responsive, and they exist very much for that purpose. But taking a more systemic and whole economy approach, I've been working in this space for a long time, and every time I want to crack my head against a wall when we hear banks, public and private, say there's no bankable projects, therefore we can't spend money. I actually think it's a really tired narrative, because public development banks, more than anybody else in the system, actually have the ability to bring communities together, to make deals happen, not to sort of wait and for that project pipeline to arrive at the door. And then I guess the question becomes, why is that not happening? And when we speak about bringing communities on board, I've listened a little bit to, we need to bring them to the table, we need to make space at the table. I was inspired by a young woman from Panama once at one of the COPs, and she said, we've forgotten about the table of the rest of the world. We're making our own table. A table is not just if you're trying to create space for somebody else. A table becomes just when everybody gets to a table as equal partners and dignified partners, both having something to give. Communities have knowledge of their need. They have that data at heart. They actually have some savings pools. Yesterday, the slum dwellers representative mentioned that these savings pools at an informal level can help make them contribute into these projects as well. And then perhaps in the due diligence processes, Mia mentioned the ILO guidelines for JT financial institutions. There's a lot of magic in the due diligence process, but if you want to put people at the center, then I would add to what has already been said, there's three things. There's a sequence of investment that has to happen. There's a certain pace of investment, and then it's understanding that it has to be systemic. I've heard a lot in the last 3 days, mostly about single asset mobilization, but we are trying to drive an economic development transition, which means a whole economy approach. So that means our narrative about bucketing just transition projects as different from the technological investment is a flawed starting point in the first instance. The first thing to create justice and social cohesion is to respect the humanity and respect the dignity of rights holders, not stakeholders necessarily. Everybody has rights, including the coal worker, including the coal mining company. Everybody has got a right to a dignified livelihood. And that means the way we construct projects and bring these together and make them interdependent so that we don't have separate mechanisms for a just transition funding on the one hand and everything else on the other. I don't believe that's going to work to drive mainstreaming and systemic change at the level and scale we want it to. And maybe just to close then, I believe public development banks are, and I'm a total believer in PDBs. When I was small, I wanted to grow up and work at a PDB, and I was very privileged that I had that chance at the DBSA, and I'm still there now. Public development banks exist for exactly the times that we're living in, times of change, times of disruption. We're not asking anything new of public development banks. We have to introspect also and ask, do we need all the frameworks? Do we need all the principles? Do we need more compliance standards? Do we need all of this talk? How much of courage are we going to have to just come together and actually make what we can see that is obvious need happen? And if we're not doing that, why is that not the case? And to hark back to Crispin Alva, right at the beginning, he spoke about this very difficult geopolitical environment we're in at the minute. And the world is fundamentally changing, and it has changed, and maybe some of us in a bit of denial about that. But all these chickens, so to say, is coming home to roost. So we have to find more creative, experimental ways of making all of this happen, and we have to do it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Chantal Naidoo. Thank you for your remarks. Thanks for recalling that we all have rights and that stakeholders should be considered as rights holders, and that making transitions just means achieving human rights and also, of course, the SDGs. So thanks a lot. Thanks to all of you for this very intense discussion. I would like just to conclude with a few takeaway messages. First, we heard that just transitions cannot happen without social investments. This was actually the title of our event. They cannot happen without investments in social protection, in skills development, in education, in health, in employment creation, and other social policies and programs. As we saw in the case of South Africa, transitions can also provide countries with a unique opportunity to invest significantly in their social fabric. This investment is crucial for ensuring that the transformation is equitable, sustainable, and inclusive. According to our discussions, banks have at least two roles to play. First, they need to ensure that their investments contribute not only to the economic development, but also the social development. And this can be done, for example, by ensuring that their projects, their operations create decent jobs with social protection, with skills development, entrepreneurship, etc. Second, public development banks also need to support the development of social policies and social protection and employment programs on skills, social security funds, public employment, etc. This contributes to building the social fabric of each and every country. And effective policies are essential for guiding social investments. Last message, for the transitions to be just, public development banks must collaborate with other stakeholders, other right holders, as Chantal explained. They need to join forces, of course, with governments, but also with the United Nations, with civil society organizations, with trade unions, business associations, the employees' organizations. This was shown by the example of CDP and Save the Children, of course, multiple examples coming from the government of South Africa. Also the Global Accelerator on Jobs and Social Protection for Just Transitions that Mia Sepo mentioned, and of course your powerful analysis, Chantal Naidoo. So as explained by Nick in the opening, the FIX Coalition for Social Investment serves as a vital space to continue this discussion and to jointly advance this work. It is a platform for exchanges between PDBs to enable them to really share their best practices, to learn together, to discuss ways to measure the impact of their operations, as Hubert was mentioning. This platform also offers, through its working group on the Global Accelerator and other working groups, one on education, one on health, really real opportunities to engage and support government roadmaps for just transitions. So thanks a lot for all this participation, this room which was full until the end. We look forward to continuing this discussion with you. And before everybody disappears, we would like to take a group picture with all the panelists and their support teams, because this was really a team effort. So yes, please stay around here so that we can take a nice group photo. Thank you so much. Thank you.